Welcome to Book Talk. I'm Alan Stewart. I'm joined today by Daniel Wallace. Dan, thanks for coming by.
Thanks.
Daniel Wallace is the author or co-author of a number of books about pop cultural subjects in general and Star Wars in particular, including Star Wars, The New Essential Guide to Droids, Star Wars, The New Essential Chronology, and Star Wars, The New Essential Guide to Characters, all from Del Rey Books. Dan, with all these books on Star Wars to your credit, I guess it'd be fair to say that you're a fan.
I'm a fan, and I've been a fan for 30 years. This year marking the 30th year occasion of the release of Star Wars, and I'm not alone. I think that there's a lot of people who are both older than myself and younger than myself and kind of in the sweet spot of having been children when the original movies were released, that have now grown up and as adults find something of value to keep coming back to this particular universe.
Right. I consider myself a fan, but I was 20 when the first one came out. I'm showing my age now, but I'm a fan, but I don't think I have it in my bones quite like you and guys in your generation, or girls in your generation.
I think you might be onto something there, because I do think that when I was, I saw the original movie when I was 7 years old. So I was really into it at that age. It was a pop cultural phenomenon. And when you're 7-year-old, it's even more of a pop cultural phenomenon. You can't escape it. Everybody in your grade school is talking about it. And what was interesting about this, and getting back to the whole generational thing on there, because I think that to some degree it's true, when I grew up and I was in college and that, it was kind of like, I wasn't following it that much. I kind of fell out of it for a while. I found other interests. But then when I was around people my age in college, everybody would always come back to Star Wars. Hey, remember when you first saw that movie? Do you remember when you had the Walrus Man action figure? And we'd have these conversations. And that kind of coincided with the rise of the internet as a culture in the 90s. This would have been in the 90s. And that whole generation, that Generation X generation, was kind of, not quite facetiously, but dubbed the Star Wars generation, because it was the first generation to do that, to find this unifying thing. And then when something like the internet came around, it became this cultural thing of young people in their 20s. It was like, that was what we had glommed onto. That is, in fact, what enabled me to become a professional writer of things like this.
Okay. Well, that was going to be my next question, since you're a fan, like a lot of folks in your generation, and you've managed to land this great gig where you can, research Star Wars and spend days and days just, into Star Wars and, get paid for it. So how did you land the gig?
It is a great gig. The Lou Gehrig quote, "I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." I kind of am, because and I know other people who are working for Lucasfilm who are about my same age that I kind of was fans with at one point, and now have parlayed it into a career. A lot of people who are working for Lucasfilm now out in California are of this Star Wars generation. Mid-90s, internet culture becoming kind of a phenomenon, myself being into science fiction and Star Wars and things like that. I am naturally interested in this unifying computer network. What can I do there? So of course I seek that out, and I was kind of an early adopter of the internet, and surprisingly, there are a lot of Star Wars fans on a computer bulletin board. You never think so, but
can't imagine.
Kind of glommed on it, and kind of found each other, and it feeds on itself when you find people. This is, of course, true of the internet in general, but when you find people who share your interests, you become more interested, because you kind of feed off of each other, and everybody kind of encourages each other in their particular pursuit. It was just a fun thing to do for a couple of years, but it became such a great resource that people who were already science fiction writers would come to visit that community and say, "Hey, I'm writing a book about things," people that Lucasfilm had already hired. I got to know several of those people. They gave my name to Lucasfilm, and the next thing I knew, I was hired to write the first book, which is the Essential Guide to Planets and Moons, which came out in 1996. The whole thing of feeding into this was what enabled me to get my foot in the door. The fact that I had been reading and writing my whole life was what enabled me to kind of get a base hit once I was able to get to the plate, I guess.
Right. So most of these books that you've written on Star Wars are, I mean, for lack of a better term, reference books. You're writing, essentially reference works about a fictional, universe. What's your working method, basically, for for the book on droids? I mean, do you basically do you have like a pile of material that Lucasfilm sends you, or do you spend time at the Lucasfilm archives, or how does that work?
The pile of material is mostly here. So it's having a good memory of what makes up the underpinnings of the universe and being able to put that to use. Luckily, I have a good memory for those types of things. I tend to remember those things and I'm able to kind of explain them. That's kind of the way it works. The funny thing, you said that these are reference books. So technically they're nonfiction books, but they're fiction books in a sense, in that I'm not really describing anything real at all. I'm describing models of robots in a science fiction universe that took place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The interesting thing about one of the ones I was able to do was the new Essential Guide to Characters, which when it was released in 2002, made the New York Times bestseller list for their nonfiction, paperback nonfiction, and I was very gratified, but I was also amused that it was under the nonfiction category, describing characters who never lived. The whole thing, though, is keeping it up here and having that basic knowledge to work from, and having all the other reference books already. I mean, I kind of have a head start in that I was a fan for a while. I got back into it, and then when I first started to do this seriously was about 10 years ago. And so by that time, I had a lot of reference materials that I had purchased on my own.
Sure.
Since then, in order to keep up with things, I've gotten new things. So now I have, 3 bookshelves full of reference works that if you looked at them, your jaw would drop. You'd say, how did you ever amass that much? Well, they did it little by little, a few a year for
30 years.
Yeah, for 30 years. It adds up. It's the grain of sand theory, but it's there, and it becomes easier and easier to do these things as you go along because you have that base of knowledge to work from.
Does Lucasfilm do a lot of quality control? I mean, do they check your facts? Again, facts in quotes, I guess. Or do they pretty much just, this guy knows more than anybody else that we're paying, to know this stuff. So just if he says it's true, it must be true.
I wish that were. That'd be nice. To some degree, there's some of that because I do know a lot about it, but they absolutely have fact checkers that verify everything that goes through. They're very protective of their universe as well, and their idea on this at Lucasfilm, George Lucas creates the universe. It was his idea. He sat down on notebook paper and he wrote out this screenplay for the original Star Wars in 1973, and everything comes from that. And when he creates a new movie, as he's done for the last 6 movies, he comes up with a storyline. But Lucasfilm and all the people that work for George Lucas as an entity publish other things. They publish nonfiction books. They publish novels. They set video games within the Star Wars continuity, the universe. They have comic books. There's been some cartoon series that have been released set in the Star Wars universe. And the thing that's really unique about Lucasfilm's approach on it is they've said from basically the very beginning, all these stories really happened in the sense that they all kind of take place against each other. Other publishers don't always do that. They'll publish books, but it's like they don't fit in. They're just if you enjoyed this, you might also enjoy this. Lucasfilm will actually go and say, this comic book that we're publishing is the story of what happened in this particular year in the timeline. They're very meticulous about that. And so everything does have to be fact-checked because they want it to be right. They don't want you to publish something that doesn't fit in with this other piece. And it makes it harder and harder to put all those pieces together. And 2 of the projects that I was involved with, the Essential Chronology, which came out in the late 90s, and the new Essential Chronology, which just came out a couple of years ago, were basically the attempts to knit all those together into one document, a history book. If the Star Wars universe had a history book, everybody would know some of it because they have all seen Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and all the new movies that have come out. not a lot of people know the spin-off material, and that's where, and in Lucasfilm's view, it's all one big tapestry.
Sure.
This is the overview to the tapestry.
Sure. Probably a number of people in our audience probably don't realize just how long that chronology is. I mean, how far back does it actually go beyond where the first of the
immensely
movies
far
starts?
back. Yeah, the whole storyline from a Star Wars standpoint is, if you took the original movies as kind of year zero, and then you subtracted from that, they have told stories that take place 4,000 years before that time period. They've told stories that take place 5,000 years before that time period. There are sections in there that go back 25, 30,000 years before that time period, because there are certain things that have happened and have been published in the literature, or they were the subject of games and other things. Going forward beyond that, if you took the movies as the 0 point, they're telling stories right now, mostly in the comic book world, that take place more than 100 years after, when all the characters from the movies are all dead, and there's a
That's
new
sad.
generation. It is sad a little bit, but it's kind of inevitable that they did that. I was a little surprised too, because it was they don't say how such and such a character died, but the fact that they don't exist in this time period means that they probably did. And
I'm not going to tell you how they died, because that's a story
that's a story in itself, and they'll reserve those things. But the whole idea is that you have these different periods of time. Here's all these years. If you mapped them out on a timeline, it would be immense. And some of them are very crowded, and some of them are blank. And that's been their policy, and they're going to continue to do that. Whenever they release something, this is how this fits together.
Sure. It reminds me somewhat of what some of the great fantasy writers have done, like J.R.R. Tolkien with the World of Middle-earth, where people who know the Lord of the Rings kind of know this like 2 or 3 years worth, and there's like tens of thousands of years of history before that, most of which doesn't get into the books, or never did get into the books. Of course, he just had to keep it kind of in his head, and you're working with, there's, I guess, dozens of writers, or
there's dozens of writers, and it's evolving. I mean, when Tolkien was doing it, he had all of his notes, and a lot of those materials have come to light since then, and have been published or republished in various formats. With the Star Wars story, it's evolving now, and the interesting thing about maybe working on something like the new Essential Chronology, which is a history book, is that the time periods that you're writing about aren't finished, and so you'll be talking about something that happened maybe 50 years ago and something that's happening now, and in the middle are the prequel movies, like the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith that came out. When I wrote the original version of that book, those movies had not been released yet, so it was an interesting thing that you're trying to write a chronicle, and there's a pretty big piece that's missing. And so we just kind of waved our hands a little bit and skipped over that, knowing that the actual audience for the book would understand where we were coming from. But there is a little bit, everything fits into a timeline, but not every story is told in order. They'll go back and say, we're going to fill in this era now, we're going to fill in this era now. So there's some sort of retrofitting going on. In the work that you do you ever just come across things where it's like, gee, that just doesn't fit at all? Somebody wrote this novel in which this happens, and then somebody's written this comic book that refers to the same character, and it's like, it doesn't. It has happened. It has happened. It mostly happened with older materials, because Lucasfilm is pretty diligent about making sure that everything's going to fit. So if anything has been published within the last 15 years, I would say that the odds of that happening, except for minor glitches, are pretty small. Very early in the publishing history, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, they weren't quite as diligent about that, and there were some things slipped through that probably don't fit now, but there's a handful of them.
I read those old Marvel comics with the green bunny rabbit and that stuff.
Well, he fits.
Does he fit?
Sure, why not?
He's in the Essential Guide to Characters, if I look at it.
He's not in the Essential Guide to Characters, but I think he exists definitely as a part of the story. But there are a couple of things from that era that don't fit, just literally don't fit, from a matter of, A does not fit into B. The idea of, does a green bunny rabbit look silly? Maybe, but, he fits. I'm a big tent guy, where it's like, unless it really does not work, my instinct is always to try to make it fit, because somebody somewhere read that story and liked it. So I don't want to tell that person, that story didn't happen or that story's not official.
Sure.
It's finding out a way to make it fit
Right.
unless it's completely irreconcilable.
Right. You have a blog that's called Continuity Criticisms and Captain Panaka.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the concept of continuity and just like what that means and why anyone should care what it means.
Well, continuity is the whole policy. Now, talking about earlier about everything fits into this
Right.
timeline. That's what it is. It's continuity. And I don't know that it's necessary to enjoy a universe, but I think if you have it, it makes it more enjoyable. Not everybody agrees. Some people are just like, you know what, I just like the movies.
Right.
I don't want to read any other stories. I don't want to have to get up to speed on this huge backstory.
Sure.
And I totally understand where they're coming
Right.
from. And Lucasfilm has always said, you don't have to do any of that. This story on its own, the movies that you've seen, perfectly enjoyable on their own. But if you like Star Wars and you're interested enough and you want to spend some more time with it and you like to read, there's a lot of other things that you can do to get
Right.
involved in that universe. Here are some of them. And that's where continuity comes in. It just makes everything fit together better. And you feel, people who read those stories, including myself, I think you feel rewarded that, okay, now I know what happened after Return of the Jedi. I wanted to see what happened to my characters as they grew a little older and they got married and they had families, and now I know. And that's what continuity is making the feeling that everything's
Right.
kind of knits together
Right.
and it works as a cohesive universe.
And the fact that when you read a particular novel, it's not just that particular writer's idea of what happened to Luke and Leia and Han. But
Right. It's all been
what
vetted.
George Lucas says happened to them,
Yep.
even if he didn't write it.
Yeah, it's all been vetted through the company, and they approve where things are going. So even if it's a surprising direction, you kind of hang on for the ride to see where things are going.
Also relating to the blog, Captain Panaka. That's probably a character that not everyone in the audience knows. Who's Captain Panaka, and why did you decide to highlight him in the blog?
Captain Panaka is this character who is only in one of the Star Wars movies. He's in the first Star Wars movie, Episode 1, The Phantom
Right,
Menace.
right.
He is the chief of security for the Queen on Naboo, Queen Amidala, and he's a guy who, he's kind of a pessimist. Everything he says is, if you read through his comments in the movie, pretty much everything he says is kind of a downer. He's always saying, that's never going to work, or we're never going to be able to get through it, or we're never going to get past their blockade, or this is a terrible idea. And the sandstorm is going to wipe us out. And everything he says, and I love the guy because I thought it was so amusing. And a few years after I saw the movie, I wrote a short story that was published in the Star Wars universe, and the star was Captain Panaka. Somehow I gravitated towards this guy, the C-level star in the movie hierarchy, but I had a soft spot for him. So he's become my personal cause.
Every character is someone's favorite.
It's true. It's totally true. There are characters every character is someone's favorite, and with the whole fan community,
Right.
You'll meet those people who, if you don't treat their character well, they'll let you know.
Changing gears away from Star Wars for just a minute, some of the other, I guess, fanish things, if we want to call them that you've worked on. You contributed to both the DC Comics Encyclopedia and the Marvel Comics Encyclopedia. DC being the company that gives us Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and the Justice League, and Marvel giving us Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, those characters. You've worked on both encyclopedias, so you're probably in a good position to answer this question. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but who's stronger, Superman or the Hulk?
The answer to that question, it's probably Superman. But the answer to those questions, those matchups, is always, realistically, of course, it's always who the writer wants to write. And people will really get into arguments about those things. They'll say, well, Superman would probably win because of X and Y, and they'll come up with those things. But, whenever somebody sits down to write a story, writer X wants to say the story in which Superman wins the fight, and writer B wants to win the one in which the Hulk wins the fight. But it's got to be Superman because he has more, he can fly, he'll just fly away.
But the madder Hulk gets, the stronger Hulk gets. So there's no limit to how strong he can get. Make him mad enough.
Yeah. Superman's super speed. No contest.
Is working with DC, Marvel, is it pretty much the same sort of experience as working with Lucasfilm? Or are
Yeah.
they more laid back, less laid back?
It's similar in that DC and Marvel both have their own continuity. It's going to be that term again. Lucasfilm is everything fits into this timeline. DC and Marvel do that too, because all their characters, if you're talking not about the movies so much as you're talking about the comic books that they're set in, which is what these were guides to the original source material, the comics, which is still being published. In the DC universe, you have Superman, you have Batman, you have Wonder Woman, you have the Flash, you have Green Lantern, you have all these characters. But they all take place in the same universe. So there is an effort to say, here's how all these things fit together. Occasionally they'll have a big event in which all the characters team up and they stop some sort of universe threat to destroy the entire universe. Marvel does it too. And so they both have this sense that things are happening and it's continuity. And I think if they didn't do that, neither one of them, and same thing with Lucasfilm, I think if you neglect that continuity and you say, no, none of these take place in the same thing, you lose the pleasure of seeing guest stars. The whole idea that, oh, well, here's the Fantastic Four, they're showing up in Spider-Man. It's kind of fun to see that. And you lose the sense that things they're just a sort of suspension of disbelief that these are events that are really taking place. And I think when you buy into that, it just makes the experience, the reading experience, a richer one.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Getting back to the blog for just a minute, I noticed that you have a rating scale on your blog where you talk about geek points and nerd points and dork points.
Yes.
What's the difference between
what's the difference?
geek, nerd, and dork?
That's an excellent question. The difference between what is a nerd, what is a geek, and what is a dork, and I'm uniquely qualified to answer this question. Now, the difference is, and this is actually fairly insightful, it was explained to me fairly recently too, but a nerd would be somebody who's very knowledgeable, very bookish, a person who always has something open, but sort of a voracious person, somebody who spends a lot of time in the library reading everything. A dork would be somebody who, I don't know what their level of expertise is, but they're just inept. They're clumsy. I wear mismatched socks, and I don't button my shirt up the right way, and that person. The geek would be a unique thing in that somebody who knows a lot, but they know a lot about one thing. You can have a Star Wars geek. You have one here right now.
Yes, obviously.
You could have a sports geek. You could have a Civil War geek. You could have somebody who's a geek about gardening or quilting or any of those other subjects. And the term tends to be used in sort of a sci-fi fantasy context, but it's really somebody who's a fan about one subject and knows a lot about that. So on the blog, I had kind of calibrated myself. I scored very high on all three scales, in fact, but I scored the highest on the geek scale, and I have several areas of expertise that I've plowed into something productive, which is this nonfiction writing career. And it is fun. As you said when we sat down, the idea that I have something that I'm really into and that I really enjoy that I can make into a career is amazing.
Yeah. Last year you came out with a couple of books on Superman Returns, the most recent film in the Superman series. That's of course a thing where you're writing not about stories that were written years ago, but about something that's kind of current. Was that like a different experience? Did you Did you get a chance to go to the set? Did you meet any of the principals involved?
That was a great experience. It was. I wrote 3 books that came out in conjunction with a movie, Superman Returns, The Art of Superman Returns, the Superman Returns visual guide, and I also wrote the official movie guide to Superman Returns. I went out to Sydney. It was shot in Australia, and I spent 2 days there. I spent a day with the production designer, Guy Dias. I spent a day with the costume designers. I toured all the sets. I didn't meet the principals when I was in Sydney, but when I flew back, I interviewed all of them over the phone, which was another interesting experience. It was amazing because it was just rushed. It was completely different because it wasn't analyzing something that's written down and or
Right.
something it's more historical. It's happening now.
Right.
Here's the script. It could change tomorrow. We're shooting this right now, and everything was changing. It was very bustling, and it was a whirlwind thing. And I interviewed Bryan Singer, the director, several times on the phone, and he talks a mile a minute. So I was overwhelmed a little bit trying to get it all down. And you have a set release date. It's going to be released on this date.
Right.
You've got to get
It's gotta
everything
be
done
done.
immediately. It was rushed. It was probably the fastest things I've ever done, but it was one of the most exciting. And the books that came out in conjunction with it, I was thrilled.
Great. So you've written nonfiction about fiction, and you're blogging. You've also done some work in games, is that right?
Yeah, I have done some work in games, role-playing games. The whole idea of the role-playing games, meaning back in the 1970s, the Dungeons & Dragons was the original thing, and that they have licensed that concept out where you can still do rolling the dice and figuring out your things, but in the Star Wars universe, and I've been able to work with that. It still is somewhat like writing a book, but you have to figure out the rules.
Sure.
You have to figure out the little mechanics of it, too,
Right.
that if I roll a 20, I inflict 15 points of damage. So there's a little bit of a number crunching involved in that too.
Right. You also wrote you were the main question writer for the Trivial Pursuit Star Wars game.
Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. I wrote all the questions for Star Wars Trivial Pursuit, which was another exhausting experience on a short deadline. Many hours sat with a pause in front of the TV screen trying to look and count things in the background. Is that good enough for a question? Can I really say that there were 7 stormtroopers, not 6? Nobody's going to get that one right. Oh, okay, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but did you get a response from people who played it like, that was too easy, or that was too hard?
It's funny because a lot of the real diehard fans said it was way too easy. And I could understand that they would say it was way too easy because I was trying to make it accessible. But you're talking about people who maybe are casual fans and people who are hardcore fans. There's no way to make those two things intersect perfectly.
Yeah. We're just about out of time. What have you got that's coming up? What can we be looking for next few months or next year or so?
I'm working on 2 different things that I wanted to mention. The DC Comics Encyclopedia is right here. We're in talks right now to release a second version of that, including all new things that have happened since then. The DC universe has gotten very interesting in the last couple of years with a lot of changes. Those will all be reflected in a new volume. The second thing is a new Star Wars book coming out, and it's tentatively called the Star Wars Atlas.
Wow.
The idea is that you take something like the Atlas of Middle-earth, which was set in Tolkien's thing that had a lot of maps. You do that on a Star Wars scale, so you find the map of the galaxy, and you follow the Millennium Falcon's path as it goes from Tatooine to the Death Star to the Yavin base and
the
things like that, and all those things. I'm working on it with a co-writer, Jason Fry, and that should come out in 2008.
Wow, that sounds exciting. That's all the time we have. Thank you very much for coming in, Dan. This is Book Talk, and I'm Alan Stewart.
You're watching the Library Channel, a broadcast service of the Memphis Public Libraries and the City of Memphis.